I call James Shaw.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. So I rise on behalf of the Green Party to speak on the KiwiSaver Budget Measures Bill. We will be opposing this bill, sir. This bill is one of 5 pieces of legislation introduced under urgency to give effect to particular elements of yesterday's budget. And what a budget! What a budget! Billed as a hardship budget, it included, let's be gracious here, a $25 a week benefit increase for families with children, which we applaud, a working for families increase, which we applaud, and an increase in childcare assistance. Mr. Speaker, after 7 years in government, the National Party has finally realised that they can no longer ignore increasing public alarm at the broadening and deepening of child poverty rates in New Zealand. When I was campaigning in Wellington Central in 2011, and I was going to the Meet the Candidates evenings, and I would talk about the 250,000 children living in poverty, I kind of got that sort of blank look that you get when you know people don't really know what you're talking about. 3 years later, in 2014, when I was campaigning to the same people in the same halls around Wellington Central, and I was talking about the 275,000 children that were living in poverty, I got absolute recognition, nodding heads. People really knew it was an issue, and I'll tell you why. It's because for the intervening 3 years, that's what we campaigned on. That's what we talked about. We never shut up about it, and a huge range of civil society organisations from Barnado's, UNICEF, Save the Children and others have made child poverty the political issue that it deserves to be. So, we're going to claim some credit for the budget, for actually making it a political issue, for getting child poverty up on the agenda to the point that the government has had to listen. And it is great to see this government adopt this as an issue, even if it is a weak tea, just might work, maybe kind of approach. If you want the real thing, then in 2017, I recommend you vote for the Green Party, because we've been championing this cause for years and years and years. National has done what it has done, not because they wanted to, but because they had to, because it became such an important issue. Certainly, sir. So, to the bill at hand, what does the bill do? It removes the $1,000 KiwiSaver Kickstart contribution, making it effective from the delivery of the budget yesterday. The government's argument for this is to achieve fiscal savings and improve the value for money of the KiwiSaver scheme by lowering the headline cost. Okay, that's a fair enough objective. But, as has been already remarked on tonight, this is a wildly successful scheme. About 15,000 people a month sign up for KiwiSaver, and they do so in large part because of the incentive scheme that is in place. It has slowed down, not because the incentive isn't working, but because the rates of adoption are getting to saturation point. It's more than half of the population, of the eligible population, is now a member of KiwiSaver. But we also know that the hardest to get to group are the most disadvantaged, right? Are people at the bottom end of the scale. And these are the people who need the incentive more than anything. So while we understand why, that the government wants to pay for the extensions to benefits that they described yesterday, they're taking that money out of KiwiSaver and essentially moving it around in the same pot. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at some of the other things that happened in yesterday's budget. The Job Seeker Support and Emergency Benefit was down 5.7%. Supported living payment down 1.2%. The sole parent support down 1.5%. The accommodation assistance down 0.8%. The hardship assistance down 1%. And this, one of the most successful schemes that we have to address poverty in this country, is losing the main incentive to get people into the scheme. So, it is a Peter and Paul budget. We're taking money from one and moving it around largely the same group of people. What we're proposing, later on in this debate, we are putting an SOP in, Mr. Speaker, the intention of which is to keep the $1,000 kickstart payment for people who have a community services card. The reason that what we're suggesting is that we can meet the government halfway. They were saying, okay, we understand that you want to eliminate what you see as a middle-class subsidy. You want to help to, cut the costs of, what is a pretty expensive scheme. We understand that. But if you really believe that yesterday was a hardship budget that is designed to reach out to the most vulnerable people, then support our SOP to retain the $1,000 kickstart for people who are on a community services card. Why a community services card? Because that's the easiest, simplest way to implement a proxy for people on low incomes. So it does catch a wide array of income bands, but we believe that it is the simplest, best way to retain it for the people who need it the most, who actually need that incentive the most. We also know that the overall cost of that to the government will not be that great because it is adoption at the lowest end, which is the hardest to get. So we think that if you keep the incentive in place for the people who are at the low end, you're going to continue to keep it for that vulnerable group, and because we know without the element of compulsion that rates of adoption will be reasonably low. The overall headline cost to the government won't be nearly as great as it would if you kept the overall scheme. Our preference, of course, is to retain the overall scheme. In fact, Materia Turai, only a week ago, launched a proposal for a kids KiwiSaver scheme, which would also ensure that the most vulnerable children in society had a nest egg of up to $12,000 by the time they got to the age of 18, which they could use for tertiary education and for a house deposit or similar purposes. Given that the government has the numbers to pass this bill and to remove the $1,000 kickstart from KiwiSaver in its entirety, what we're proposing to do is to limit the harm of that and to support the government's notion of the hardship budget yesterday by retaining the kickstart for people who have a community services card. We believe that won't be as expensive for the government. We believe that it will be in line with their intentions yesterday of producing a budget that's oriented at the poorest in society, and it keeps in place the principles of what has been a wildly successful scheme. So we do hope that the government supports us on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.